mistake we see sometimes is people want to talk about all their new offers and all their brand building kind of storytelling within their existing followership, right? But those people already know you because they've already decided to follow you. Social media is not necessarily the place to be building your brand. Building your brand is in your paid advertising, reaching a new audience.
Tap into innovation at IAAPA Expo, the biggest industry event of the year.
Join us and other attraction pros in Orlando, Florida, November 18th to the 22nd to engage with the global community.
Learn from the experts, leave with new ideas, and turn your passion for the industry into new possibilities.
Register now using the link in the show notes to save up to 30%.
Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman. I am obsessed with the guest experience and helping attractions make that their top priority for success.
And I'm Matt Heller. I am passionate about organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and employee engagement.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the Attraction Pros podcast.
Hey, Josh, how are you?
Hey, Matt, I'm doing really well. How are you?
Well, I am fantastic.
All right.
Yes. And I have a question for you.
Ooh, a question.
Yes. You are very well versed in many aspects of the attractions industry and the business of the attractions industry.
Well, that's because I listen to the Attraction Pros podcast in a week.
There you go. And this is a statement, not a question, because I've heard all the things that you've been talking about for many years, the way you talk intelligently about different aspects of the business. But the question that I have for you is, what area of the business do you feel like you are maybe least familiar with or least intelligent about in terms of how it works and the way that the way that we use it within the attractions industry?
Information technology.
Okay.
I don't know if that was the answer you were looking for. I don't even know if that's the right answer. Maybe I know more than I think I do about that. But I think that sounds like a complex underground network that is supporting all the things that we see on the front level, both on the employee and guest experience side.
I think there's probably also a lot more to information technology than we realize.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to have more guests on that talk about information technology.
Yeah, that's true.
But the reason I ask is because one of the areas that I find that I struggle with and probably don't understand nearly as well as I could or should is marketing. And today, what's that?
I don't believe you.
Well, it's true.
Okay.
Today we get to talk to Kristy Tozer, who is the founder and marketing consultant with RumbleBuzz, who has a almost lifetime of experience in events and marketing and PR. And we get to kind of dive deep into this concept of marketing. And I know I learned a whole bunch of stuff today.
I learned a whole bunch of stuff today too. Even though none of them were about the topic that I think I know the least about, but that we'll save that for a future episode. But no, some of the things that Kristy has shared about marketing, I think kind of gave both of us a perspective that we've never really seen before. And Kristy, like you said, she's been in the industry for so many years. She spent 20 years with SeaWorld Parks and Resorts, as it was. Well, actually, she was probably with Bush Entertainment Company for that company's gone through a lot of name changes. What is now known as United Parks and Resorts, I think it is. See, it's
resources on there. See, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, United Parks. But it's the SeaWorld and Busch Gardens brands, basically. And she talked about her time in Tampa, or her time in Orlando, her time with Shamu across America. Did you ever remember seeing those Beetles?
I remember seeing those Beetles when I lived in Orlando, but I didn't know that there was a whole nationwide program to bring Shamu to the masses.
Yeah, I definitely remember seeing them around Orlando too. Or maybe it was just one that I would just regularly see all usually around the SeaWorld area, probably heading to those areas. So it was cool to learn about that. And so we get to hear what she does from the standpoint of running an agency, a marketing agency, where she works with attractions and talks about how it's important that that the agency that an attraction works with understands the business of attractions and the nuances of it. And that from a marketing standpoint, you're not just marketing to try to build brand awareness, and you're also not marketing to just sell a thing or a product, but it is really about the experience of visiting a theme park or a zoo or a cultural attraction, a for-profit, a nonprofit, whatever that might be. And it's so important to understand the nuances of that business in addition to all the best practices of marketing.
Well, and I would say understanding all of those things and having such a wide knowledge of all of the disciplines that go into marketing is the beginning of what she talks about in terms of having a seat at the table.
Mhm.
Because you have to have that reputation, you have to have the knowledge, you have to have the skills and the experience to be able to sit at a table with operations and all these other departments around the organization to say, this is how marketing can help the business, this is how marketing can kind of bring people together and really figure out how they can help tell the stories of the organization, which ultimately, will get people to hopefully like you on Instagram, but also then buy a ticket and get in the car and come visit.
Yeah, which there's a lot to that.
There is.
She also spent some time after she left SeaWorld. She went to what is now known as ZooTampa. When she got there, it was Lowry Park Zoo. And the reason for that name change was largely under the large project that she worked with, which was rebranding the zoo. And she talks about how the purpose was about creating that global destination, and that rebranding is not just changing the name and changing the logo. She goes deep into why they did it and what they did to achieve that goal to be able to do it.
And another sort of overarching topic that Kristy dives into is the relationship between marketing and operations. And I know that we've talked about that before on the podcast. You and I have talked about it. We've talked about it with guests. And I don't think it's something we can talk enough about because of the relationship between telling the story and then what I might call living the story, right? So marketing might tell the story to the masses in terms of what they can expect when they come on site, but then operations, and that's not just rides and attractions, but it's food and beverage, it's merchandise, it's everybody that takes care of the physical being of that attraction. They've all got to bring that to life, and we've all got to be singing from the same page of music to make sure that the guest is having a seamless experience pre-visit, during the visit, and post-visit.
Yeah, and I will say, I think that's a topic that I don't think we will ever get tired of, because everybody has their perspective of it. Everybody has those stories where it works really well, and they can share stories where it didn't work really well. And exactly. I think that just reinforces the message every single time.
Absolutely. So is it time to get to this interview with Kristy?
Let's get ready to RumbleBuzz.
Hey, Kristy, welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast. How you doing today?
Thank you. Great. I would say sunny day, but it's a little cloudy.
Okay. Awesome.
But doing good. Happy to talk to you guys.
We're happy to have you. So excited for this conversation. Can we start off with maybe you giving us a little bit of your background and what it is that you're doing now?
Oh, gosh. Okay. Well, I actually started my career right out of college at SeaWorld. And I think most people that know me know that, but if you don't, I was right out of school. It was basically an internship, and I started out mystery shopping McDonald's, as a lot of people did back in my day. Very humbling, very educational. I got to learn a lot about how important some of those roles are to the bigger picture, but I didn't, of course, learn that until much later in my career. My first full-time position with SeaWorld was in special events, and that's really where I got so much of my marketing background, actually, and so much of my operations experience, what little bit I have. Special events is where I really learned how important it is to have a seamless connection between the ops teams and marketing. And when I say ops teams, I don't just mean like traditional operations, like food service and merchandise and entertainment and everybody that works in the park, kind of, speaking from a theme park perspective, everybody that helps makes that guest experience come together. Because I had the role of trying to pull all those, teams together to coordinate them for various events that were going on, I learned a lot about how important it was. And that is something that really stayed with me as I moved back into a more traditional marketing role, moved back over to promotions after a couple of years of that. And there I started working on media promotions. So I got to learn a whole different side of marketing. I worked closely with the brand team, worked with the advertising team, and learned that part of building the brand outside of the actual experience. So it kind of went from having the in-park experience to almost the outside, what do people see about us experience, within a few years of each other. And that honestly, I think set me up for a career that ended up spending an awful lot of time dabbling in events, especially from a marketing standpoint. When SeaWorld started to build kind of a more robust event portfolio, I was fortunate enough to be on those early teams. And one of the things we did that, again, this kind of like built my experience is we set up this, what we called a task force. It was a structure where everybody that had a role in developing the event and making the event special had a seat at the table. So that did include the marketing departments, from branding and advertising and PR to operations and food service and merchandise. And everyone had a seat at the table, right? And what came out of that, and it didn't come immediately, it took years, but what came out of it was really learning how to build a sub-brand, right? So the brand of the event had to really seamlessly mesh with the bigger brand of, in that case, SeaWorld. But, as I went through my career, it kind of, trickled on down. And then how each of the teams within the park kind of supported that to create a fully immersive environment. So to me, I tell that story kind of in part because it laid so much of the groundwork for my career and where it went from that point. After all of those fun experiences, I had a really unique opportunity to be one of the project managers on a mobile marketing tour, which some of the people who've been around a while might remember, Shamu Across America. So if you've been in this industry for a while, SeaWorld had about 30 Volkswagen Bugs converted into Shamus. Like they were painted, they had fins and tails and everything on them. And we had 30 of them across the country. And we did an entire tour of North America. I mean, we went to Canada, we came all the way back down to Florida, California, and I was one of two project managers for the East Coast. And boy, was that enlightening. So took all of my event experience, all of my marketing experience, kind of shoved it together and put it on the road. So really neat opportunity. Again, so much learned out of that I was done with SeaWorld after that. No, I'm just kidding. I moved to Tampa though, not long after that. And kind of had the opportunity to still work on events a little bit, moved into a role that allowed me to do more kind of working with the revenue teams and understanding more of product and discounts and offers and loyalty programs and our annual pass program and kind of how all that came together to create the bigger picture. So just such a learning opportunity there, because I would have said going into my role at Busch Gardens, I was not a numbers person. I was not going to be on the analytical side of things. But just because at that time I happened to have annual pass under me, I kind of got roped into this little revenue marketing team. And probably the greatest thing that ever happened in my career, because I started to learn how all of these different really cool programs that we created that were great guest experiences. Now we understood how I got to understand how it impacted the bottom line, right? And so when you would go into a meeting with finance or with one of your general managers, you had to be able to explain why this particular performance or this particular, food vendor that you wanted to bring or whatever cool thing that was going to create a better brand experience, how that was actually also going to help the bottom line. So super neat opportunity once I moved to the Tampa side. And I spent another decade basically at Busch Gardens in Tampa. And it was a really cool time. I got to dabble in more events over there as well. And we had a few years, again, for people who've been around a while, we did kind of this interesting Florida park scenario where some of us on the marketing team in particular who worked in Florida kind of dabbled at SeaWorld and Discovery Cove and Busch Gardens and everywhere. And I was one of those fortunate people. So I had my hands on a lot of things, which led to an opportunity to be on basically a design team for all of the Christmas events for all of the SeaWorld parks across the country. So I had, an opportunity to use all this experience I had on, not a small scale, because obviously the theme parks are not small by any means, but on a more localized scale, and like look at how you could implement these things in different parks across the country. So I got to be in Williamsburg when they introduced their Christmas Town event. I got to be at SeaWorld Orlando when they introduced their Christmas event. And then obviously when it came to Tampa, that was ours. And just such a neat, chance to see how these things take different forms in different communities around the country. So after that, about 20 years in total with SeaWorld Parks, which are now United Parks, I think. I'm trying to still get used to that. I decided to try my hand at some consulting. It was kind of time to move on. And that led to quite the twisting road of experiences from there. I ended up doing about 4 years at ZooTampa. Oh gosh, that sounds like I was in prison. Like I did 4 years at ZooTampa. It was not like that at all. But I got to spend 4 years there. I was part of rebranding that zoo from Lowry Park Zoo to ZooTampa, which was a really cool experience. I then had an opportunity to work for Special Operations Command. Yes, like the military Special Operations Command, working on the Warrior Games when they came to Tampa. And Warrior Games, not everybody knows, but it's basically Paralympic style games for wounded warriors. So that was really neat, really special opportunity. And then after that, I went to work for the XFL for a little while, and that's a professional football league, like a spring football league. And that's where I was when COVID hit. And that kind of really leads to, the next step. I think COVID was everybody's pause and restart.
Yeah. Kristy, can you talk a little bit about the shift from working for SeaWorld Parks Entertainment, as it was known at the time, into consulting and what that was like, and kind of those initial kind of getting that off the ground, and now building your own brand and helping other organizations rather than what you were used to of 20 years of supporting this existing strong brand?
Gosh, that is such a good question. I knew when I left the SeaWorld parks that I wanted to do a little bit of consulting, but I really wasn't sure what form that would take. So as I went through kind of some of these experiences, I actually did start in a consulting role, if you will, which led into my position with ZooTampa. So I wasn't very good at it, I'll say, because I obviously took a job almost immediately with one of my first clients. But once I moved on from there and I kind of got my head on straight, the idea that I had is, in all of my years working with other outside agencies as an attractions person, a lot of outside agencies didn't understand our business. They understood marketing, they understood advertising, they understood branding, they understood all the big pictures, but they didn't get the nuances of working at an attraction and having that every day. What was your attendance? Did you hit your goal? What are you going to do tomorrow to make up for it? Oh, you had a great day. Why did you have a great day? What caused that? And our agencies always really struggled with that dynamic. And then, of course, as the added bonus, you guys know, especially like in the event side of the business, sometimes you can have a really big day and it's not a big revenue day necessarily. I remember that happening when we were working on Howl-O-Scream. We had, this one night that just blew the doors off. We had so many people show up, but it was almost all high school teenagers who didn't spend a dime on anything else, right? They bought their ticket, they came into the park, they bought nothing else. So then you have, anyway, so the point is all these dynamics were in play. And as we worked with agencies over, all of my years with the various parks, we just never found anybody who really understood that. And so when I thought, boy, how could I help some of these maybe smaller parks, right? Maybe I'm not necessarily going to go back to a SeaWorld or Busch Gardens, but could I work with a smaller entity and help them understand what I've learned? Could I be that bridge between the agencies that have the advertising and the branding experience and the media experience with that day-to-day attendance and revenue, and how are you going to deliver for me today kind of requirement out of the attraction? So that was the idea, to try to find a way to tie them together.
And that sounds like that's where RumbleBuzz kind of came to be. Am I right?
You are totally right. Totally right. So as I started dabbling into consulting a little bit, or kind of contract work again, as COVID was starting to let up a little, as we started to be able to work a little bit again, I reconnected with who is now my business partner, Andrea. She was working for another entity in town. They actually hired me to help install a holiday event, which was super exciting and really fun. But when I reconnected with Andrea, she was definitely in a place where she was looking for something new. She was not feeling, she wasn't feeling like she was doing what she could do with her skill set. And through lots of conversations, lots of coffee, we came to the same conclusion that all of the things that we knew could so be used to benefit other people, other attractions and hospitality companies, because we had that inside. We had a seat at the table at one point in time, so we understood what their needs were in a lot of ways. We felt like we did anyway. So yeah, we kind of decided, let's start an agency that really caters to that industry. And Andrea's background was much stronger with PR, social media. And so she could tell those stories from that perspective, right? Knowing that it's not just about telling a great story that's going to get news coverage. The end of that story has to make somebody go buy a ticket, right? And that is different, right? A lot of PR people, and no offense to people who are in that business, because it's a hard business. It's a lot to get, published anymore. But it's not just about telling a great story. If you're an attraction, if you're a hospitality industry, you've got to sell that ticket, that meal, that whatever it is at the end. And so we felt like that was something we could bring to the table that not everybody else could. And so far, so good. We've had some good luck getting in with, some nice little attractions and some nice hospitality folks.
I'd love to go a little bit deeper into that, because that's always something that I've seen as well from from the marketing standpoint, is that there's the brand awareness standpoint, there's the brand recognition, and I would say the brand affinity of actually building fans, and especially in the last 2 decades of leveraging social media to be able to do that. But like you said, at the end of the day, 1,000 likes on Instagram is not the end goal, right? It is
if it doesn't sell a ticket, it doesn't really matter.
So where's like maybe the funnel part of it that kind of gets that from that very high level standpoint to then say, okay, here's an individual who likes us, and now they are actually going to give us money, plan a day, maybe book a flight and a hotel room, or at least spend a tank of gas to drive up hundreds of miles away or whatever that is, and actually commit all this money, all this time, all those resources, their summer vacation, all those things that go into it, of like, okay, they like us on social media, the marketing is working, but the marketing is really working because it's getting them to visit, and doing that with
how do we get it further down?
A year in some cases, right?
Yeah. Well, it's funny, because if I could just answer that easily, like, everybody would call us.
I know,
right?
that was like give me the broad, what is marketing, right? So,
right?
yeah.
But I do think there's a couple of approaches that make sense, and we have seen good results with, right? So obviously social media is a really powerful tool and has become so much more prominent in the entire marketing, I don't know, program, so we always, in my previous life, in what we do now, the most important thing is to have what we call an integrated marketing approach, right? So you want all these different layers of marketing because not everybody, you're not going to reach everybody with one medium, right? That's why all these different things exist. And as we hear, whether you're in marketing or not, you've heard all the things about, is radio going out? Is TV going out? Streaming platforms, social media, which social media, because that's ever changing, right? Are you supposed to be on Threads now? Or are you still okay to use Instagram? Is Facebook out? So it's just such this evolving kind of dynamic medium, if you will, that we kind of encourage everybody to be in multiple areas. And there's things that actually do still work that a lot of people have kind of assumed don't. Social media still is kind of top of the funnel in a lot of ways, right? It is a lot of brand presence. But the thing that's interesting about social media, and everybody doesn't take this into account, is if you have 10,000 followers, if you have 100,000 followers, those are people who have clicked the button to say, I like you, I want to see more of you. The fact that they won't actually necessarily see more of you just because of algorithms is a whole nother story. But those are people who've already said, I'm interested in engaging with you. A lot of times what the attraction, the hospitality company, whatever it is, wants to reach are people outside of that existing family, right? They want somebody who doesn't know them at all. So they're trying to build their brand. And so a mistake we see a lot of times, it's probably a little bit of a side answer, but a mistake we see sometimes is people want to talk about all their new offers and all their brand building kind of storytelling within their existing followership, right? But those people already know you because they've already decided to follow you. Social media is not necessarily the place to be building your brand. Building your brand is in your paid advertising, reaching a new audience. And we work with a lot of people, especially with smaller budgets, who are like, can we just do this with the audience we have? And the answer is yes, as long as you recognize you're not necessarily going out to new people. If you want to meet people outside of your circle, you probably have to spend some money to get there. And spending the money could be on paid ads. It could be on going to conferences and meeting new tour operators or new receptives that are bringing, depending on what you're selling and what you're bringing in, there's all these different layers. So kind of a not super clear answer on, there's a lot of different ways to reach all these people. So social media is one. We do a lot of social media. PR is one. We do a decent amount of PR. Paid advertising is important. Being out in those, at the conferences, in the travel industry, and all those places where you're going to interact and connect with new people who can bring business to you, that's all very important. And I would say if you're kind of a smaller attraction, especially, not that big attractions shouldn't also do this, it's being actively engaged in your community. Because what we find, and it's a little bit surprising, we work with a couple of nonprofits in our own community that we still discover people don't know they exist. How is that even possible? But and they're relatively decent sized attractions, but it's just that constant finding different layers and different ways to be in front of your potential audience. I'm not sure that even answered the question.
You did. Yeah.
Well,
There was a lot of rambling.
That's okay. But I think what it communicates to me is that there's so much gray area, in what you do. And that we shouldn't look at this as black and white. When you talk about, all those different channels, like it's and this is the layman's version from a marketing perspective. Like there's so many different ways that you can get your message out there. You have to diversify, right?
Yes.
You have to be, in different places, and maybe it's a different message. And, just what you said about building your brand with paid advertising, because that's where the people who don't know you are, like that was a light bulb for me. Like that's not something I would have ever thought of. So that's wonderful. But that's where, having someone that understands that kind of thing really, really is important. But I'm also wondering, and maybe this is another gray area, but if we can talk about the process of rebranding, because you mentioned that in terms of, something you've done, and I know you did it for the Florida Attractions Association as well. And I'm wondering, like, how much of that is looking at what the current brand is and saying to the people that already know, like, and trust that brand to say, we're going to keep what you like, but we're just going to change something a little bit so that, you know, we can maybe reach more people or go farther than we've ever gone before. So there's got to be a balance in there as well. So can you talk a little bit about that process of rebranding?
Oh my gosh, yes. It's a big one. And th- it's a little scary to a lot of people, right? Because they do have that assumption that people know, like, and trust their brand. And I think the important thing is a lot of people, when they think about rebranding, they think, well, I need a new logo. And that's not a brand, right? So sometimes rebranding is really just new creative, right? Your brand isn't going to change necessarily because it's still the heart and soul of who you are. And so it's probably somewhat of a misnomer sometimes, but other times it's not. When I was at ZooTampa, when we decided to rebrand, part of the desire to rebrand was to actually establish ourselves as a global brand. We had that recognition somewhere along the way that, you know, we were Lowry Park Zoo for almost 50 years. And people in the local community, and I mean, when I say local, I mean really people around Lowry Park, you know, within our Tampa community, people knew and loved that brand. But what they really loved was the zoo and the environment there. They were hung up on the name a little bit because it's what they knew for 50 years. What we recognized is we were never going to speak easily to someone in London or someone in Germany, because for them, we had to make multiple connections to understand where Lowry Park was, right? So we could showcase this really great zoo, but then they have to, well, okay, so where is it? Where is Lowry Park? Oh, it's in Tampa. Where's Tampa? It's in Florida. Oh, Florida's in the United States. Okay, so, but you're making them go through all these steps to get there, right? By at least going with something like ZooTampa, you've narrowed it down a little bit. A lot of people know Tampa. We do have, you know, a little bit of global recognition because of sports and stuff, but at least you can figure out that Tampa's in Florida. So maybe there's fewer steps to take. And when we kind of partnered up with Visit Tampa here in our community, we had the conversation with them about our just kind of what we were thinking, and they could not have been more excited. They were like, yes, because when we go out, especially in international markets, but even in domestic markets, we have to explain who you are and what you are. And we think you could do a better job. So the name was the first step in the quote rebranding of ZooTampa. But then we also had to look at what was the core of our brand, what had it been, and what did we want it to be going forward. So again, knowing we wanted to be recognized as a global zoo brand, what was that going to take? So the name ended up being actually a relatively small piece, because what came from it is a desire to tell stories of how we cared for the animals, how we cared differently, how we were very responsible, very respectful, and how we were doing kind of all the right things in a modern zoo world, right? Which most zoos are going that direction, but certainly not everybody. So it was an important story to tell. And then taking that one step further, how were we going to tell that story? Because just changing the name doesn't tell that story. So we had kind of an internal plan of how to start telling those stories, and PR was a big part of it, telling the stories to the media and getting the kind of coverage that helped kind of dive deep into that, if you will. We used social media. Those were the days social media was really just becoming an important medium, I will say. And so we were really using social media to tell those stories and to give people more insight into how we cared differently. And then our kind of final piece on that side of the storytelling was, we thought if we could figure out a way to get some long form storytelling where somebody else was helping us tell that story to a broader audience, it would make a world of difference. So we kind of set our sights on Nat Geo, and we were able to secure Secrets of the Zoo to be filmed at ZooTampa. And that was in some ways kind of the cherry on top, if you will, of our rebranding, because it allowed us to take what we started with, a lot of people had looked at, you changed the name, that was the rebrand. That was just a piece of the rebrand, because what it really was establishing ourselves as a global zoo brand. And telling those stories through Secrets of the Zoo was a big part of that establishing factor. And I signed off on that contract my last day at the zoo. So I never got to see it in production, but the team that was there when I left kind of saw it through that first season. And it was wonderful. And it continued for 4 seasons, I believe. In fact, they may still be doing it. I'm not 100% sure. I think they are, though. So it's rebrand is used very loosely a lot of times for creative, and it's usually and should be so much more than that. So on the FAA side of things, there was also a lot of work that went into who had FAA been for the last, 45 years or what have you, and where did they want to go into the future. So in that instance as well, it was more than just a logo change. We spent a lot of time developing a structure for who FAA wants to be and what they want to deliver to their audience as they go forward. So there was communication matrix in there and everything else. And a lot of that has to start with research, which gets left behind a lot of times in marketing. Everyone wants to move on to the fun, pretty stuff and forget the research side of things, which will help you set your path straight, as straight as it can be.
Thank you for sharing all that and walking us through it. I remember watching Lowry Park Zoo go through that transformation to become ZooTampa, and it's just I love when we get to hear kind of the backstory of it. And one thing too, to kind of just as an observation, is that the rebrand was able to honor kind of the old name by becoming ZooTampa at Lowry Park. So it still was able to really preserve that for those locals who had built perhaps that generational loyalty to the name Lowry Park Zoo of, it still is Lowry Park, right? So, and
there might have been a Lowry family in there that.
So there's probably much more to that story.
Yeah, but it was really important that still remain, even though we recognize a lot of people are going to shorten it.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if we can switch gears a little bit here. One of the things you mentioned towards the beginning is in your early days at SeaWorld working in special events is when you first learned about the seamless connection between marketing and operations. And Matt and I, our background is as operators. It's in attractions ops, ride ops, all of that. And we've seen when marketing and operations work really well. And we've seen instances where there is not that seamless connection between marketing and operations. And so I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more about that and how they both can and should really support each other.
Yeah. So I am a big fan of finding ways for the two to work together. And, like I said early on, not just traditional operations, which of course is really important, but also those ancillary they're not really ancillary, but the food service department is an operating department, right? Merchandise is kind of an operations department, and bringing all of them together to create this seamless guest experience is super critical. So my first experiences with that process, if you will, was when I worked on events, both on the special event side, and then when I was more on the marketing side, building these kind of branded events to help drive attendance. And unfortunately, through a lot of errors and missed opportunities and mistakes and things, is where we actually learned the more we could work together and work more closely, the better we got about it. And it was definitely not always easy, right? So we all know, marketers come up with these big dreams, and I'll only say this because I'm one, right? We have these big dreams, and, you come up with a concept for an event or even a concept for a new show or a new attraction or what have you. And you're like, this would be so amazing, or this would serve a guest, a missing opportunity that we have with our guests. There's an audience that we need to reach that we're not reaching. And so we could do this thing, and here's how we think it could come off. And then every operator in the park goes, that won't work. And so I guess kind of where we got to, and probably the greatest example of this is when I was still with the SeaWorld Parks, the leadership team, like the corporate leadership team would say, we have a gap, right? So when I was at Busch Gardens, for instance, it was identified that we had a gap with the tween audience. And we just, from the time, little kids, we did great with. They loved to come out and see the animals. We had a great kids area. Older kids loved the coasters, no problem getting the older kids and like the young adults to come out and ride the coasters. But that in-between age, we were really struggling with. So the leadership team basically said, that's what we need to fill. How do we fill it? And so, of course, everybody goes to work on their ideas for how this came together. And what ultimately, without, boring you with a million side stories, what ultimately came to be was Jungala, the Jungala area of Busch Gardens. And it was literally designed to appeal to a tween audience. And so once that kind of decision was made, well, now marketing has to go out on their side and figure out, okay, so how do we reach tweens? By the way, you can't really advertise to a tween. Well, you're not supposed to. And that was before the days of a lot of social media. So we couldn't really go on TikTok and, talk about it. So we had our kind of marching orders on that side. Operations also had a side in this, right? Not only did they have to figure out how to operate, this area of the park as they would any, but knowing that your key demographic in that area is going to be an 8 to 12-year-old who is probably the hardest to make sure they follow the rules and don't climb fences and do what they're supposed to do. Plus, they usually have a bit more freedom from their parents being over them at every moment. It felt like they had to really create everything in those areas to be more kid-proof. Even more so than in like the little kids play areas, because those kids were rougher on playground equipment and all that kind of, or not playground equipment, but like, the play area equipment and stuff. And then the food, what kind of food appeals to that audience? And so everybody had to come together and like create this dynamic area. And it had to evolve over time too, because there were things we realized we did right. There were things we maybe could have done better. But fast forward several years later, when I found myself at ZooTampa, we found a similar situation. And because a few of us had come from the same park system, we had the opportunity when we sat down to say, okay, if we know we're missing this audience, what's something we could do to bring them in? And in that case, we decided to go with an event. And we actually designed the first, I think probably the only tween targeted Halloween event in the entire community, maybe in the entire state. I'm not sure. But we created Creatures of the Night at ZooTampa specifically for a kid that was a bit too old to go trick-or-treating, but a bit too young to go to Howl-O-Scream or Halloween Horror Nights, right? So we did have some haunted areas, but not over the top haunted. We did, we had some frights, but not terror, so we were very careful to find this middle ground. In doing that, it took everybody coming together and understanding how to appeal to that age group, right? So ops had to come in and say, if we do this, here are the things that we really need to make it work for us, because these kids are the hardest ones to work with, or they're going to be the hardest on our materials or whatever, or they're going to want these kinds of rides. So we need to put them in this area. Entertainment team had to come in and say, well, that type of entertainment is really good for a little kid, or it's really good for an adult, but it's really not good for this age range. So now we've got to rethink that. But it took everybody coming in and having, I guess, the opportunity to say, here's how I need to approach that group. And then we were able to come together and say, okay, now that we know what all those needs are from an operational standpoint, how do we brand it to make it make sense? Right. And in some ways, that's the easy part. The hard part is finding all the pieces and parts that seamlessly appeal to a particular group or particular niche market.
So it's really interesting because as I was thinking about what you said earlier about research, like everything that you were talking about there to me involves research. And then you said at the very end, and then we figure out how we brand it and what it looks like, so I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that this probably also extends into the conversation of how do you make sure now that this is operational, whether it's that new area or the entire park, how do you make sure that what you're saying in marketing actually aligns with the experience that people are having once they actually do show up? They saw you on social media, they bought the ticket, they got the kids in the car, they got to the facility, and now that experience has to align with what you've promised from a marketing perspective. So what are some of the ways that you, I guess, make sure that that happens?
Gosh, and that's a really, really good question. And it is so important because I have been on both sides of it, where we've really done a good job at providing a marketing experience that matches the product experience in park. And I've worked on a couple of programs where they were dramatically different. And you hear about it on both sides, but more when it's negative than on the positive, but you hear about it either way. So I guess where I've seen it work really well, or where I've seen the most positive results come out is when, like I mentioned early on, when everybody had a seat at the table, right? When I was at SeaWorld Parks and we had these task force and we did very similar thing at ZooTampa, everybody that had a role in making the event happen or the attraction happen or the grand opening of whatever happen had a seat at the table, and everyone had the opportunity to say kind of what they needed to make it work, right? And that included marketing. So it wasn't just an operational discussion about what needed to happen to make the guest experience happen. Marketing was there too. And so in some ways it was, okay, if you guys need all these things, and once we put them together, how can marketing brand it so that it is this consistent experience from the time you see it in an ad or on a billboard to your social media to the actual, you walk through the gate. What is consistent through that process? And sometimes it was really easy to pull off, and sometimes it was much harder. So I worked on Howl-O-Scream for a number of years with Scott Swenson, who we were talking about before we started. And, for years, marketing went out and created like the marketing brand for Howl-O-Scream, and entertainment went out and built all these haunted houses and all these scary guys. And they just existed kind of on parallel paths. Like the guest experience was still fine, but there was literally nothing that connected the two. And one year we kind of managed, there were a couple of reasons why it all came together, but like we managed to come together on a concept. And we were like, so we have this really cool concept. What if we could bring it to life in the park? And at first it was like, well, how would we do that? Because you're using actors and you're using, production company for these commercials. You're doing all these things. We don't have access to that every single night at the event. So you had to be more creative with it and go, okay, well, how does that storyline translate over? Can we hire characters that are similar in nature to what's running in the ads? And that was kind of our first foray into it. And a couple years in, we got it really right. And we had one of the best campaigns for Howl-O-Scream ever, where we had vampire models, and the models that we had in our commercials and the theme kind of continued through the whole storyline. Not just from an entertainment standpoint, but merchandise got on board, and they had, shirts and merch that matched and had, not just the logo of Howl-O-Scream, but like the logo that we used in the commercial for the House of Vane, which probably I'm not supposed to say, I don't know. But, we kind of reinvented all of these things as if these models were actually Appish Gardens, and so it was one of the most seamless creations we ever had, and one of the best years we ever had. And that just took us all talking about it and trying to figure it out. But you have to all work together and try to figure it out, right? When I was at the zoo, I think because we were a smaller entity, it was a little easier to do that. But everyone has to put their ego aside a little bit and say what's best for the guest, right? What's best for the whole experience, and what's going to make, in the zoo's case, a mom with her 8 and 12-year-old buy a ticket and come out knowing that 12-year-old's going to be like, this is dumb, what's going to create and what's going to make them go, wow, through the entire experience, right? From the time they started looking at it on their advertising, looking at it on social media, hearing about it on TV or whatever, media you have, and then carried through the actual experience in the park. and then the follow-up afterwards, hopefully.
Oh,
And
man.
learning, did it work?
Yeah.
More
Yeah.
research.
Kristy, this is such a cool conversation. I absolutely love everything that you've shared with us, and I'm sad that we're coming close to the end of this interview here. I feel like we could keep talking for hours and come up with a lot more avenues to go down. But in
Yeah,
the meantime, if people want to learn more about RumbleBuzz, if they want to get a hold of you directly, where would you send them?
absolutely. So our website is an easy way to reach us. We've got a contact form on there. It's www.therumbleBuzz.com. My email, I'm happy to share with anybody here. It's Kristy, Kristy, at therumblebuzz.com as well. Follow us on Instagram, follow us on LinkedIn. We are there. A little less active on Facebook, but you can find us on the other channels.
Awesome. Awesome. Like Josh said, this has been a great conversation, but there's one more question that I can't let you leave without answering.
Oh gosh.
And that is, if you were not in this industry, what would you be doing?
Oh my goodness. It's such a hard question because I really can't imagine. I always kind of wanted to do this or something like this. Because I would say if I wasn't doing this or what I have done, I would probably be like a flight attendant, but that's still kind of in the industry. So I don't know. That's my best answer.
We'll accept
We'll
it.
take it.
Okay. I could travel, see the world,
Exactly. Exactly.
never sleep, all that fun stuff.
Kristy, thank you again so much for sharing your time with us. We really appreciate the opportunity and appreciate the conversation. And for everyone out there who is watching and listening, just remember, we are all attraction pros.